Hello. This video is going to try to explain how on the right, and I'm talking about the old right, the traditional right, the whatever you want to call it, the original right wing of politics, political spectrum, uses either explicit or implicit explanations of the course or direction of world affairs. It's something I've noticed. I mean, I've noticed it for 20 years, but I've really been thinking about it the last 5 years. And I thought more about it because you read, you learn, and you see trends or patterns, more like patterns, in how people discuss the issues, and you start to see a commonality in the thematics. Now, I'm not talking about the, oh, and I'm going to drink this Salvatore, Paulaner Salvatore. It's relatively inexpensive. The company is half owned by Heineken and half owned by a German brewing company. This is an old beer brand. It was introduced around 1640. It kind of fits in with this narrative because the monastery in Bavaria was, a little smoke there, was seized by the revolutionaries in 1799 when you had this wave of anti-clerical, anti-Christian revolution in Europe. But going back to the neoconservatives, we're not talking about them, because the neoconservatives, and I've done a video about this before, and I was trying to start this video for like the last 30 minutes. I said, let me get on Facebook real fast. I'm going to put this thing about this baseball game coming up. And then bing, 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 here comes the chat. I said, oh, no, not now. You know, the chatting chatters. It's like, how's it going? What are you doing? How you feeling today? And I'm like, fine, yep, sure, right. They don't mean anything bad by it, but you get that. How's it going? What's up? How you doing? Right. And I'm just answering right. Correct. Yep. And then they'll come in waves, and it's like the board lights up, and it's coming from all directions. How you doing? What's up? What exactly are you doing? What in particular are you doing? And I try not to be rude. I'm like, right. And it's like, and then the phone rings. People spy on me is what's going on. They spy on me and they say, hey, he's about to make a video. Hurry, start calling. Now, if it's 8 hours, it could be 8 hours, and I'm not planning to do a video, I won't get a call or a chat. But then if I say, let me get this done now, it's happening. But you know, the beautiful beer, 7.5. The neoconservatives are a branch, and I did a video about this, of the liberal movement. Because, and I'll say this, I'll explain this real fast. You know, like when you had the liberal movement starting, right, with, and I don't want to get too detailed into this, but you know, it goes way back, really back to the time of the Crusades and before that, because you've got to talk about the Gnosticism, the mystery religions, you know, Gnosticism, and that's and the conflict with the church, the original Roman Catholic Church, which back to the 1st century was battling Gnosticism and its incorporation of mystery religions, paganism, really. So you always had this kind of like secret war going on, which if you study history, it's not so secret, between paganism and the true church. So, and then we have the Crusades in the late 1096, starting in 1099, and then the Knights Templar, and then the development of Freemasonry, which was not, you know, out of the blue. It just was a extension of Gnosticism, and you had different activity along with that, like the Cathars and the Waldenses, and you know, all these groups, which if you study them carefully, they always have a common theme. It's anti-Catholic. It tends to be anti-Trinitarian, and it has elements of Satanism and Luciferianism. And then So, and then you've got the big uproar in 1517, which were almost on the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther, with his very strange, just sudden revolt against the church and his peculiar adoption of the rose and cross as his logo, which one has to believe it cannot be coincidental that he would adopt the rose and cross, the rosy cross, the symbol of Rosicrucianism, which is basically the world flag of anti-Catholic, Masonic, Templar revolutionism. But anyway, you had that sort of underlying thematic, and it spread into England, as we know. And coincidentally, enough, you had the revolt of the royal family in England against the church by a defender of the faith. But so, you know, this undercurrent of that, and then we had the formal launch of the revolution, and I always call it the revolution, capital R, not the French Revolution. It really, a proper way to describe it would be the revolution launched in France, not the French Revolution. It's the world revolution that happened to be launched in France. But so then that goes along, and we can go through the whole history of it. We don't have 6 hours, you know. It would take 10, 20 hours really to get a good explanation of it. And then we have where the revolution went into Russia in 1917 with the Social Democrats, Mensheviks, and the Communist Socialists, Bolsheviks. And of course, we know the Bolsheviks won that struggle between the two different socialist elements. And but then there was a conflict between, which is so common in the world of the revolution, there was a conflict between two branches of the communist revolutionaries. You had Stalin and Trotsky. Lev Bronstein was his real name. And Stalin was saying, no, we have to build up the Soviet Union as an industrial giant first. Then we go and spread the world revolution. Well, of course, he was really more like a national socialist, Stalin. He claimed he wanted to promote world communism, but what he really wanted to promote was world communism under the veil or under the direction of Russia. And that falls along with the theories of Professor Kennan, which gives us the basis of the Cold War. And we have what we call that as the containment doctrine. And that was the idea that it wasn't that we were battling communism, it was that we were battling Russia. And that went back to the old British conflict with Russia, the expansionist Russia, to 1815. And you know, all the presidents in America, and all the British, of course, but all the presidents in America, especially with Nixon, because he was such a deep thinker about Russian expansionism, they also, you know, if you really looked at it, they weren't against communism, because of course they allied themselves with China in 1972. They were against the expansion of Russia. Okay, so Stalinism, which is really Russian National Socialism, and a conflict with Lev Bronstein, who was more of the purified communist revolutionary, because he and Ulyanov, Lenin, but especially Trotsky, they wanted to have a world revolution, Trotskyism, and they wanted to, so he was like the left wing of the communist movement in Russia. They want to have worldwide revolution all at once. That's what Trotsky was saying. We need to have terrorism around the world. Immediate terrorism to destabilize the world now. Car bombings, assassinations, murder, mass murder, everywhere you see. And then we can crash the whole Western civilization, destroy all the Christian churches, murder all the Christians, or at least subdue the Christians, and then establish this communist world revolution. And Stalin said, you're crazy, because all the Western countries, Germany, United States, Great Britain, Japan, France will team up and invade us and kill all of us, and then we won't have a revolution. We'll all be dead. And the Politburo and the Communist Party sided with Stalin, and Bronstein was expelled eventually from the party, and then he was expelled from Russia, and he was tracked down and murdered in 1940 in Mexico City, probably on the orders of Stalin. But he represented more of the Jewish faction of the Russian Communist movement. And so we know that Stalin was very suspicious that there was some sort of Jewish plot against him. And so they had the purges in 1936 to 39. And the vast majority of, well, I don't know, a significant number, I don't know about a majority, okay, but a significant number of the people liquidated or imprisoned in the purge, the Stalin purge, was Jewish. I have a book by this woman, Ginsburg, and she was a dedicated communist, like big time communist, but she was seen to be allied with the Trotskyite idea. And her husband and her were taken out. She wasn't killed, but they were taken out of the picture. Well, what did the Trotskyites do? Most of them left and came to America, where they continued their activity by basically establishing what we call today the NeoConservative Movement. And you had the Pearl family, you know, and other ones. And you had a National Review magazine. And so this grew, and it ended up co-opting the conservative movement, especially starting in 1952. So the conservative movement really became dominated by a faction that was expelled from Russia and represented the more extreme leftist version of communism. So the conservative movement today, you know, like your Fox News and all of that, they claim they're conservative, but if you notice, they're controlled by these people like Pearl, Wolfowitz, right, and all of those other guys, and they like to have wars all the time. They're very big on like destabilization, invade Iraq, invade Afghanistan, and you know they have their hangers-on, you know, their camp followers, your Grahams, McCain's, and all, you know, in your networks, Fox and all. So they basically are promoting the old Trotskyite. And you don't have to believe me. You can just look it up. Do your own research. Trotskyite and neoconservative. It's all the same thing. Irving Kristol, I'm thinking of. But so I'm not talking about that, because the conservatism that you see on the news today, or like a Bush, Jeb Bush, this is not the real conservatism. This is the controlled conservatism that originated in Russia and was exported to the United States. So that is a false, and that's why you never get any conservative values from them, because they're not, well, obviously they don't represent the values. It's the enemy pretending to be the ally. And if you can't see through that, you're either willfully ignorant or you need to read now and learn. So we're talking about the old right, the original conservatism, and that was represented by the church, the real church, the Catholic Church, right, established by Jesus and through St. Peter. Now, some of these conservatives today, they're anti-Christian, you know, and they're anti-Catholic, and they got their tattoos and their pro-abortion and homosexual stances and all of this. Well, that's a tip-off that they're either ignorant or they're working for the other side. You know, they're almost certainly ignorant. They don't know their history, because the old Holy Mother Church represents the conservative values: family, clean living, anti-paganism, community, corporate, or what should I say, community interaction, and really certainly a pro-European standpoint. and when I say European, I'm talking about the values of Europe: family, peace, prosperity, not exploitative, usurious banking schematics. But so that sort of like community endeavor of towards success. And so, and that's what the church was always saying: European people should be working together. And that was sort of like the Crusades. Here's this Muslim plague, right, coming out of Arabia, and they have to be stomped. And so, and it would have been destroyed. You know, this whole edifice of Islam could have been destroyed in 100 years, but the Christians were more interested in fighting each other. You see, that's that plague of nationalism. These white Germans are killing these white French, and these white British are killing these white Irish. And so, like, the Catholic Church was always saying, even up until World War II and to today, up until today, Christian people should not be fighting each other. European people should be brothers. And then Europe, but they don't listen, you see, because we know more than you, Pope. Why should we unify and be strong and prosperous and successful when we can rip each other apart because we wanted to take over this 3 square mile area of some insignificant country in Africa or in America, right? So, well, we know the whole history. Europe started colonialism in the 1400s, and so then Europe exported itself to the rest of the world. They took over Africa, Asia, North America, South America, Australia, and all the island countries. Basically, the Europeans took over the world, and they still run the world to a large extent. Well, they do run the world. It's just the bad guys of Europe running the world. So, especially with Great Britain and France, well, I guess, you know, Portugal too, but they started to set up little European countries around the world. So when they would set up colonies, it wasn't just, we're going to conquer this area of the world. We're going to create Europe in that part of the world. So we had the British colonies in America. They were not considered separate countries. And this is why I've always, the last decade at least, had this animosity towards the American Revolution, because, you know, these people are so self-defeating. These colonies were considered Great Britain in America. If you lived in Virginia, you lived in Great Britain. If you lived in Great Britain, you lived in Great Britain. So it's this family idea. And then you had these revolutionaries, and who knows what their secret plot was, or maybe they were just stupid. If you lived in Savannah, Georgia in 1770, you did not live in another country. You lived in England. You just happened to live in the England that was in America. If you lived in Wellington, New Zealand, you lived in that British country down there. You know, that was the whole idea. This is a British country. This is British America, Ontario, Moncton. This is British Australia, Queensland. Okay, so this is the concepts that these people cannot grasp. And Germany was trying to do this, and Portugal and Spain and the Dutch and the Belgians and the Spanish. If you lived in Mexico, you lived in Spain. Spain in America. You lived in Spain in the Philippines. You lived in Spain in Peru, okay, or in South America. But where, and let's look at the anti-colonial revolutions, like say the Mexican Revolution of 1810, the American Revolution of 1775. You know, you can't say really that it was an uprising against the oppression of the crown, because in most cases, you'll notice, if you study history at all, the crown tended to protect the rights of the common man. The crown created burghs. You know what I'm saying? The crown created the city governments, the burgh, the town governments, the city states, the city charters. No, it was the feudal lords that were always against the king, and they wanted to keep the people in serfdom and slavery, and who are involved in Freemasonry. I'm talking about the the feudal lords. And if you look at the revolutions against Mexico in 1810, and then the second revolution in 1910, this is always has a Masonic component. I was in Matamoros, Mexico, and I went to the Museum of the Mexican Revolution. Every item in the museum was Masonic. I mean, this is without question. If you go to study the American Revolution, it's all members of the craft. Yeah, it's morals and dogma. It is a system of morality, or what you could say a fraternity with secrets, if you don't want to call it a secret organization. Fine, whatever. But what sort of morality? You'll know them by their fruits. And what is the fruits? What are the fruits of this tree? The fruits are revolution, world conflict, and an attempt to rebuild. Now, see, this is a very important thing. Rebuild. Freemasons started with stone masonry. Builders. Build this new world, or as they will call it, the New World Order. This new world, and create a new man outside of religion. Yes, I'm not finished because I have to talk about the other end of it. But here's a book in this high school I taught at, run by maniacs who decided that old books from the 1800s weren't important. They had this huge collection of history books from the 1800s, leather bound, beautiful, fantastic, perfect condition, perfect. I would read them back in the 80s. I went over there one day. I said, I need that history of Germany. Oh, we threw that all out in the dumpster. These books were embossed, leather embossed with the flags of each country, history of every major country. I said, have y'all gone insane? What about the National Geographic magazines? Oh, we're about to throw those out. Immediately, I went in that room and I got all the National Geographic magazines from 1923 to the present. But luckily, I got a hold of this book, The History of Germany by Wolfgang Menzel. I should have stole the book. I would have been rescuing the book, not stealing it. But I read this, and I made copies, and I said, wow, this is so important. So I made, this is many years ago. I made copies, and I started highlighting it. And the old history books are always the better ones, the politically correct. And if you study your history, political correctness started with communism. It is a communist operation. It's to stifle any realization of what's going on. That's a fact. He talks about, why did this revolution just start? Well, it didn't just start, and it had nothing to do with helping the poor. That's always the pretext, because these revolutions are run by wealthy people. They're not run by the poor. And usually most of the people murdered are the poor, the lower class. But he says the secret society of Freemasons, I can't read the whole thing, but it's fantastic. Made use of Scottish Masons, was Jesuitical. You see, he says the Jesuits played a principal part in this Scottish Freemasonry and transferred much that was Jesuitical, I'm talking about the structure, to Masonry. The letter G represented George, King George. We know George the first, second, third. They were Germans who assumed the throne of Great Britain. 1714. It's not about God, it's George, and a son. Of course, a son. Well, obviously, it's going to be the son, because Alexander the Great, that was his logo. The sun god. Because Alexander, remember, he said that he didn't believe that his father was actually his father, that he was actually the son of Zeus, and that he was a god. Obviously, he was not. But that's the whole idea of the Masonry. It's all allegorical, supposedly. All right. So in Germany, Freemasonry had ever a moral purpose. Well, of course, it had a moral purpose, but what sort of morality? Well, like the Rolling Stones said, let me introduce myself. We're talking about satanic morality. Okay, French Freemasonry with the Templars, Society of Freemasons, were prohibited by the Catholic states of southern Germany. So here's where we get down to it. The Society of Freemasons was prohibited by the Catholic states of southern Germany, including Austria. Now remember, Austria was always considered part of Germany. where another secret society of a far more dangerous character, however, was formed. Professor Adam Weishaupt of Ingolstadt in 1776 established the Order of the Illuminati, to which he gave the old Jesuitical constitution. This fanatical conspiracy, the Illuminati, became connected with the Freemasons. Well, obviously they were the Freemasons, of a faction at least. The Illuminati were not decidedly antithetical to the great majority of Freemasons. Well, common sense, they weren't antithetical because they had the same goal, to establish this new world. Whereas your mainline Freemasons want to establish it through progress, slow, steady progress. The Illuminati wanted to illuminate the world. That's why we call this period the Enlightenment. I mean, there's no accident there. They want to, in the sun, see, they want to enlighten the world through this revolution. But they want to use the red flag, and that's why the Jacobins use the red flag, because you have to spill some blood here. You know, that's their idea. The Illuminati set up the Lodge of the Three Globes in Berlin. It discovered far greater energy by declaring every person who attempted to degrade Freemasonry to a society inimical to Christianity, incapable of becoming or of remaining a member. In other words, you had to be a dedicated, straight up Satanist or atheist. You couldn't be like quasi-Christian, all right? The Illuminati was discovered and was strictly persecuted by the Christian authorities. And Weishaupt fled to Gotha, where he was protected by the Duke, Louis Ernest. So you always had people on the inside that were secret Satanists. This also served as a lesson to the Freemasons. Blah, 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 blah. I can't read it all. It's so interesting, though. But the Illuminati continued to exist under the name of the German Union in Mayence. That's where the Terriers came from. But don't worry, I'm not. All right. Illuminism took refuge. Spartacus. Well, they adopted code names, just like the Soviets adopted code names. Lev Bronstein became Trotsky. Vladimir Ulyanov became Lenin, and etc. Dalberg took the names Crescens. Weishaupt, Spartacus. Kniga became Philo. Louis Ernest, the Duke of Gotha, Timoleon. Ferdinand, the Duke of Brunswick, became Aaron. That's very important, Aaron, right? Von Dembusch, Bayard. Bud became Emilius. Nikolai, Lucien, etc. The society was essentially raised to an importance by its connection with Mirabeau, the French Mirabeau, the talented but unprincipled French agent in Berlin. All right, Weishaupt's successor, Bode, was Weishaupt's successor, and von Dembusch visited Paris for the purpose, quote, of illuminating France. Well, certainly they illuminated France, and Philip, the Duke of Orleans, at that time the Grand Master of French lodges, received him. Well, we know the House of Orleans was the Conspiratorial house. They were the cadet branch of the Bourbons, and they were always jealous against the Bourbons. The Bourbons had their faults, to say the least. But the Bourbons established with Henri IV, with all their faults, which were profound, and all their corruption, etc. They did represent some important things. The Bourbons represented Christianity, Roman Catholicism. They represented France, which they had a problem with the nationalism. You know, to invade Germany in 1648, 1630s, and to take the side of the Protestants against Austria, the great Christian country, the Heiliges Römische Reich, to take the side of these Protestant rebels against a Catholic country was an inexcusable offense, and probably had a lot to do with the destruction of the Bourbons. It's like a curse. And this was a Catholic Cardinal Richelieu, Richelieu, promoting all of this. All right. But the House of Orleans was always this anti-Bourbon faction because it was so jealous that they weren't in control. So they promoted this Freemasonry, probably for selfish reasons. And most of them were murdered by the revolution. Okay, so what do we know? The revolution was established on May 1st, 1776. And that's why we have May Day, the International Communist Socialist holiday, May Day. May Day, because they honor the day they were founded, formally founded. When was the revolution formally launched? Well, of course, it was formally launched July 14th, 1789, when these okay, I'll call them people, because I'm generous like that, launched this revolution against their great king, Louis XVI. You know, it's so funny to me that people will criticize the great King Louis XVI Bourbon. They say, well, he had faults. He was weak. He was indecisive. Yeah, we all have faults. We're all indecisive and weak at times. But think about this great man. He loved his family. He was a devout Catholic. He loved France. He wanted to do the right thing. Did he know what to do? No. He knew that France was in a terrible financial crisis. We know that. He called the Estates General into a session in the spring of 1789. Why? To help the country. Well, of course, the conspirators, the House of Orleans and their Illuminati Masonic gang, they wanted this to happen because they knew they could manipulate the situation to create the revolution, and that's exactly what they did. The king was always at a loss. Like, he didn't understand what was going on because his hobby was locksmithing, not studying international revolutionary activity. So he always seemed confused, like what was happening here? Much like Nixon with Watergate. Like, he knows something's happening, but he can't figure out how could this all be coming together? You know, like with Nixon, how do they know which tapes to ask for? Well, obviously, I mean, Nixon obviously knew that obviously someone was working on the inside. We know that. But back to Louis XVI. So he didn't want to go, you know, like to call out the dogs and wipe these people out. Now, Marie Antoinette, the great Austrian princess of Habsburg. So Marie Antoinette Habsburg, her mother, Maria Theresa, the Duchess of Austria, wife of the Heiliges Römischer Imperator, the emperor. You know, she's got that Germanic idea, right? So he was saying, well, maybe we can negotiate, you know, and her attitude being with her Germanic background was, we don't negotiate with these people. We need to annihilate these people without any mercy or consideration of clemency. All right, so she had more of a thorough approach, but he didn't know what to do. So luckily his family fled to the empire, and when the revolution was launched, well, okay, all right, his son died, his first son. So the great prince and King Louis the 17th survived after his brother died. So what did these wonderful revolutionaries do? Well, like communists always do, they murder. So they killed, well, of course, the great King Louis XVI Bourbon tried to leave France. Of course, he's the king. He can go wherever he wants to go. He decided he would leave France, but they were captured just miles from the empire. They were brought back to France in chains or under guard. And then in 1793, the great King Louis XVII Bourbon was murdered by these revolutionaries. Now, once they murdered the king, once they committed this great affront, then of course, there can be no, you know, you cannot entertain the idea that the people will be let off for these considerations of mercy or anything like that. And then the great Queen Marie Antoinette murdered. The great Louis XVII, the king, murdered 1795. But his brother Louis XVIII did escape into the empire. So when he returned in 1715, after Napoleon and his revolutionary gang, because Napoleon, of course, represented the epitome of the revolution in his own conservative way, you could say, right wing of the left. Well, of course, they had to go find these people and they had to settle these accounts. just like when Charles II returned to the throne in 16 during the Restoration, was it 1651? They had to settle the accounts. The bank accounts did have to be balanced. And so you have the white terror, as they call it, whatever. All right. So now, so that's the left we're talking about, and the liberal movement, and it continued to grow, you know, and they use all these different dialectic approaches. They're not the international left is not nationalist. They're internationalists. They believe in a world revolution. They want to set up a single republic where all authorities will be murdered, all Christian, especially Christian, but all religions will be wiped out, and all their followers will be murdered. And the whole world will be created, because they want to tear down and recreate this Tower of Babel. We will ascend, this is their idea, into heaven, and we'll become God. That's basically what the movie Rosemary's Baby was about. It was if you watch that movie carefully, it's an allegory about what this is about. Okay, so and then we have all the, you have different factions of the left. You got the Democratic Socialist, like the Democratic Party in America, the Republican Party. They're the right wing of the socialist movement, and the progressive era in America. We know about that. Started with Lincoln and all of his murderous activity, and so then we have the Republican Party and the progressive movement. Of course, progress. All your Freemasonic temples are progressive. So, and then we've got the under Woodrow Wilson, we've got the Square Deal, and then under Roosevelt, we have the Square Deal. Square, of course, Square. And then under Wilson, we have the Fair Deal, and then under Roosevelt, the New Deal, and under Truman, we've got the under Wilson, this Paul Honor is strong, Under Wilson, we had the New Freedoms, New Freedoms. Under Truman, we had the Fair Deal, and under Lyndon Johnson, we had the Great Society, the War on Poverty, those were all extensions of the New Deal. And then under Reagan, we had the New Right, which is actually part of the left, created by the Trotskyites who escaped from the Soviet Union. And George Bush's, what do they call it? Compassionate conservatism and all. So then you've got two parts of the same program. You've got the left, the Democratic Party, and the right, which is really part of the left. Now, here's where we're getting to the crux of the story. So we had the right wing battling the international left in this war to the finish for the last, we're really back to the Crusades and further on than that. The right represented by the true church, the Catholic Church, which, yes, you can argue was infiltrated to a large extent. No one is arguing that point. But the church still is the church. And there are signposts that it will always be the true church, guided by the Holy Spirit, so you gotta look for those signposts. But now we're going to talk about the explicit versus the implicit. Up until World War II, 1939 to 45, you would have explicit explanations of why this conspiratorial activity was occurring. Like in Menzel's Germany. And at the time, you got to remember, at the time, the 19th century, it wasn't considered like gauche or untowards to mention. He was saying, very frankly, many of the German middle class came under the control of the Jew. Not my words, that's his words. Read the book. So, and then in Russia, when you had the assassinations of the great emperor Alexander II, who was trying to help the common man by ending serfdom and reforming Russia. Well, of course, the international left could not let him reform Russia, because then the Russians would be satisfied with their life. they had to spread chaos and and commotion. So he was murdered in 1881? Can't remember. By the communists. Lenin was part of it. And so the Russian secret police, they started to say, well, what is behind this? How is this happening? And so we know what happened. The Russian secret police, or the Russian intelligence service, really, they said, well, it's this Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It's a Jewish conspiracy, largely. And so what happened in Russia was you had this widespread, these widespread incidences of pogroms, of massacres, or repression of Jewish communities, because they said, well, in Russia they believed in this so-called what you might read about the blood libel. In Europe, not in America, most people in America have never heard of this, but in Europe they believed that there was this. This is going to sound bizarre, but this is a fact. Most people in Europe probably know about this, but they wouldn't discuss it with you. They wouldn't dare mention it or discuss it, even though they would probably talk about it at home in secret under the covers. But they believed that there was this long, ongoing thing where Jewish synagogues, this is no joke, would kidnap Christian children and sacrifice them in satanic ceremonies. And we know that the Bible, the Holy Bible, talked about this. If you read the book of Revelation, they talk about a conspiracy. They say they call themselves Jews, but they're actually the synagogue of Satan. So the Bible calls this conspiratorial structure the synagogue of Satan. The synagogue of Satan. Well, the Russians believed that the synagogue of Satan was kidnapping Christian children and sacrificing them. And there was all these rumors, they would find a child, a dead body of a child, a Christian child, with no blood. There would be no blood in the child. The child would be empty of blood, but cut, obviously abused. And they said, no, they're using the children in these Jewish Kabbalah ceremonies. And in fact, the Catholic Church was not necessarily in disbelief of that, because they're the Catholic countries of the Vatican states was the last part of Europe to have ghettos until World War II. But they had ghettos in the Vatican states until 1870. This is in fact the case. But so they had this widespread anti-Jewish uproar in Russia, and so there was this big immigration to America, where they went to Miami and New York City, and then of course all of a sudden there was a lot of socialist activity in Miami and New York City. But anyway, we go to Germany. Now you see, in Germany there was always this openly explicit explanation of conspiratorial activity. Like, why do we have this labor union trouble? Why do we have this revolutionary uprisings, like in 1848, whatever, or in France in 1871 with the Commune? And, there was always this thread, well, it's them, the synagogue of Satan, doing it. And even the emperor, the Kaiser, William II said that Germany would have won. Well, I could argue against that. Germany would not have won, but the Germans had a big problem dealing with their defeat in 1918. But really, it goes back to naval power and the collaboration of the United States and Great Britain. But Germany was defeated. And he said it was the sons of Judah, the tribe of Judah, that defeated Germany. And he said they should all be wiped out, preferably by gas. This is what he said. So then, you had this, in 1919, when Germany collapsed and the emperor fled to the Netherlands, you had this attempt by the socialists, we're going to take Germany now. So you had people like Rosa Luxemburg and her compatriots. And yes, they were not Christian. They were of the tribe of Judah, but but they said, we're going to have the revolution now. And in Hungary, Bela Kun, also of the tribe of Judah, we're going to have this revolution now. We're going to kill all the Christians. We're going to wipe out the Catholic Church. We're going to set up the New World Order, communism. Unfortunately for them, they overreached, as the left tends to do, and they didn't realize that there would be a strong nationalist backlash. And so when they tried to establish their communist empire in Europe, they were all shot and killed. I almost said murdered. They were all shot and killed for their treason. Rosa Luxemburg, Bela Kun, and all of them. All right, so they failed. They did set up their communist revolution in Russia. Now, you know, Germany had all these problems, right? In the 1920s, the European countries with their self-defeating suicidal nationalism, picking on Germany, and there was this upsurge in narcotics, pornography, prostitution, etc., right? You know the whole story. It's the same old story. It's always the same story. And then you had this nationalist party that took over Germany in 1933. So when the nationalists took over, they were, of course, explicit in their explanation of why do we have these problems in the world. So the National Socialist German Workers' Party said, well, it's because, now, of course, they were anti-Catholic. Just think if they had been pro-Catholic, if Hitler had been pro-Catholic. But you know, people oftentimes say, I know everything. I know everything. I don't need the Pope to tell me anything. Do you know everything? So they cut their own throat. But they say, okay, we know National Socialist theoretics, right? I mean, it's pretty obvious if you just read. What is the reason for world conspiratorial activity? Well, the German National Socialist Party said it's the synagogue of Satan. They invented the term anti-Semitic because they said they were not against Jews because of their religion, because the National Socialist Party didn't care about religion. They were not religious. They said we could give a, you know, we don't care about their religion. We don't like them because of their race. I mean, this is clearly explained in the video. The eternal, what was it? The Iverta Juden from 1940, the SS made a video, the Iverta Juden, and they were saying this is why we have this anti-Semitic policy, and they explain why they used the term anti-Semitic. They invented the term, and if you watch the video, the Iverta Juden. But so they, you know, they had this theoretical approach, say the synagogue of Satan, and this is interesting because they said the synagogue of Satan controls two parts of the world: capitalism, which they called international finance capitalism, international finance capitalism, Wall Street, and international communism. So, you know, most people look at it as capitalism versus communism, right? Capitalism versus communism. But the National Socialist Party in Germany said, no, it's international finance jury in working in coordination with international communism. In other words, they said that it was two branches of the same tree, the revolutionary tree. And of course, they saw Freemasonry as part of this. And so you had the Nationalist Party in Germany was extremely anti-Freemasonic, and they tried to track down all the Freemasons. Same thing in Spain when the Catholic Nationalist Party of General Francisco Franco de Bahamon took over. He thought that the reason Spain was under such consternation was because of a Judaic Masonic conspiracy. He believed that until the day he died, November 1975. But he was loyal to the church. And he thought that because the Germans were disloyal to the church, that they would be destroyed. And they were destroyed but Franco stayed in power until he died. All right, now we could talk about the Austrian nationalists under the regime, the Catholic regime that was in power until the Germans, the Prussians invaded in 1938. All right, but we're not going to. After World War II, there was a great reluctance to discuss conspiratorial activity in general and who was party to it, and to be specific. So like people were really like, you know, before World War II, you had Henry Ford, and he was publishing his materials, which were clearly naming names and saying, this is who's behind it. These people are behind it, the synagogue of Satan, etc., etc. But after World War II, with our revelation of all the atrocities, of course, the atrocities of the enemy, the American and Allied atrocities don't matter. You know, bombing civilians on purpose don't matter. If you kill you know, 60,000 people with a radiation bomb, that's justified. If you kill this number of people supposedly with poison chemicals, that's unjustified. I think most people on the right would say murdering people is unjustified in any case, but you know, but America, we like to justify murder in a certain context, right? And, you know what's their justification? It shortened the war, which is comical, quite comical. We kill civilians to protect soldiers' lives. And this is considered heroic, which is beyond belief. But after the war, you know, people were very reluctant to discuss conspiratorial activity. Now, you had people like Robert Welch, who was involved with the Welch Candy Company, the creators of Sugar Daddies and Sugar Babies. You probably had a Sugar Daddy candy, very good candy. But he said, no, I'm going to get out of the candy business. I want to get involved with politics. He always had an interest in politics, Robert Welch. And he started the John Birch Society, named after John Birch, American Army officer who was murdered by the communists in China in 1945. And even the liberals consider him the first American murdered, killed in the Cold War, which started in 1945 and is still going on today. You know, Robert Welch is an interesting character. Now, when he started the John Birch Society in 1958, he said, we want to defeat the communists. He called it the ICC, the International, Communist Conspiracy. Okay, he was right. It is international. It is communist. I don't know about the word conspiracy. See, that when I was a member of that group, I always had a problem. I eventually had a problem with the word conspiracy, because a conspiracy is something done in secret. But, you know, the left, the international left, they pretty much tell you what they're going to do. It's not really a conspiracy when you're posting it on your website, right? Maybe a better term would be the International Communist Program. Nonetheless, he started, and there's suspicion about that, and I can't argue with that. People say, well, he was controlled because he had all the guys that started the society in 1958 had connections to the Council on Foreign Relations, etc. You know, yeah, okay. So, but anyway, he started this group, and they were a very prominent right-wing group in the 1960s. They were anti-civil rights, couldn't stand still can't stand Martin Luther King. I mean, if you want to read 1,001 articles that denigrate Martin Luther King Jr., read the John Birch Society's website, and you'll get all of that. But you know, a problem cropped up early on with John Birch Society. There was a member, one of their really early prominent scholars, intellectuals. His name was Revelo P. Oliver. I believe he was born in El Paso, Texas. I know somewhere along the Mexican border. He was a Mexican American, but born in America. Revelo P. Oliver. Oliver spelled backwards. His parents made his name where you could read it the same front to back. He was like the #2 guy in the John Birch Society. But he and Robert Welch had a terrible falling out in 1996, and he was immediately expelled from the society. He made a speech where he said that we know who it is. It's the, the Jews, whatever, But Robert Welch immediately expelled him, and he became an arch enemy of the John Birch Society. And he went on and associated with all your modern nationalist, socialist, national socialist, you know what I mean, groups, till he died in 1994, 21 years ago. So he was like, he was always an atheist, no surprise there, because a lot of your National Socialist people are atheists to their detriment. They say, well, Jesus was created by the Jews to corrupt people and all of that. And yeah, Jesus was a Jew. But you see, the John Birch Society, or the real right wing, the Catholic right wing, is not anti-Semitic. We're saying no. It's it was sort of like a virus or an infiltration of evil from the get-go. Remember, Moses wanted to do right, but there was this introduction of paganism from the beginning with the golden calf, and this goes back to Lucifer and the whole idea that I shall become a god. He knows that if you eat of that tree, you will become gods. You see, so this is why you had this breakdown in the right wing unity, because you had the Catholic right wing saying no, it's not the Jews who are like genetically predisposed to conspiratorial activity. And then you had the anti-Catholic right wing, the National Socialist Hitler group saying no, Alfred Rosenberg, the Jews have a genetic predisposition to engage in conspiratorial and parasitical activity. And there you have the breakdown in the right wing. The Catholic right wing say, no, we're not anti-Semitic. We love all mankind. Of course, we know that some of mankind has been terribly corrupted by the devil. We do recognize that there is a synagogue of Satan. We do recognize that there's a predominance of conspiratorial activity among certain, what do they say today? Nation groups today. But we're not saying it's genetic. Then you have the that other side saying it's genetic. It's a scientific fact. They're born parasites. They're not even humans. They're like a mutate. Of course, we in the Catholic right don't accept those sort of, those kind of theories are sort of like the mothership, or the Nation of Islam. Like, no, we don't believe that there's a spaceship that's going to take everybody up, right? So, Revelo P. Oliver broke off and made his own organization, and he spiraled down into the world of obscurity, although he's revered in the Hitlerian old right. So the whole point is, if you look, the whole point really, this is to sum it up. If you look, and believe me, I've looked a lot. If you look at the working thematics of the right wing, read all the stuff the John Birch Society has published, and then go to your local library like we have here and get Signal magazine. Now, Signal magazine was produced by the SS in Germany, the Schutzstaffel, from I believe 1940 to 45, and it set the standard for Life magazine, the first magazine in the world. They have big glossy color photos, blockbuster type articles. But what does the John Birch Society say? They say that until 1971, they said that it was an international communist conspiracy trying to break down the world. In 1971, Robert Welch said, no, we're going to start calling it the Master Conspiracy, run by people he identified as the insiders. Who are the insiders? They never say. Who runs the Master Conspiracy? They never say. But what they do say is that the master conspiracy is two things at once. It's, on the one hand, international banksters. They call it international banking conspiratorial activity. On the other hand, it's communism, which works together to bring upon us the world revolution. Of course, the JBS will never entertain the Freemasonic angle, because there's a lot of Masons involved in their organization, which obviously brings the whole thing into question. I agree with that. Now look at what the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Francisco Franco, and to a much lesser extent the fascist party under Mussolini, said. Well, Franco and the National Socialists in Germany said the conspiracy is run by two groups: international finance Jewry, banking conspiratorial activity, capitalism, and communism, who work together to bring upon the world this revolution. So in other words, it's the same theory promoted in America and promoted in Europe. But one group, the Americans, are almost always implicit. They won't say who it is, they'll just imply it. But over in Europe, and in that side of the equation, they might openly say it's the synagogue of Satan. In other words, them. Now you might say, well, what is your point? Like, where do you fall? I have to tell you where I fall. Being Catholic, being part of the true church established by Jesus Christ, by God, in other words, Jesus, God, the Son of God, God the Son, we would have to say we love all mankind. Whether they're white, black, or yellow, three major races: Caucasoidal, Negroidal, Mongoloidal. We do love mankind. Do we understand that there are differences between the races? I mean, a 3-year-old could figure that out. But we must, like Jesus Christ said, we must love our enemies. Of course, we want to win. We want to win. We pray, come Lord Jesus Christ, rescue us from our sins and rescue this world from this evil. Okay. So we believe that we have to give place to anger and let Christ solve. We're not Protestants. We're not waiting on the rapture. We're not waiting on the rapture and sending money to the guy so he can buy a Cadillac and live in a very expensive mansion in Houston. We're not stupid. On the other hand, you have your European National Socialist Thomas Lawsunik, Stormfront, Occidental Observer, all your, what ended in 1945 but yet continued along. And we know what they're saying. All religion is wrong, which to me is, you're feeding into the conspiracy. It's all science. It's certain races are biological mutations, and there's this parasitical race which pretends it's white but is Asiatic. We call them the outgroups. They've infiltrated the white culture. They want to destroy Western civilization, and they have to be destroyed without any mercy or, that group is, they're your knights of, your secret empire, the knights of the White Camellia, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, and all of them. We cannot support that because of our humanity. And then on the other side, like I said, you got the Catholic idea. Christ will save us. We have to have faith, but we're not stupid. We have to be workers. We have to be like Constantine the 11th, standing on the wall, fighting against the horde. If we die, we die. It doesn't matter. So there are commonalities, there's differences, but there's commonalities. Transcendence. We might die, but our movement lives on. There's commonalities in who is the enemy. We say the synagogue of Satan. They say international finance jury. And that's the whole point of the video. There's the implicit and the explicit explanation of the root of conspiratorial activity, which has always been fascinating to me. And I'd be interested in see what you have to say about these this video and to listen to your comments. Thank you very much.